In the evening, I'd watch a movie with my mom and scroll through photos of protests on my Instagram feed, feeling an intense urge to join others outside. But as someone who is immunocompromised, and living with my mother at the time, I couldn't afford to risk contracting COVID by protesting in crowds during the height of a global pandemic. At that point, there was no vaccine and very little understanding of how life-threatening the disease was. So instead, I started to focus my freelance writing on race, identity, and news surrounding the reemergence of the Black Lives Matter movement. As I read through studies on topics like adultification bias and chatted with sources about their experiences with microaggressions, I'd read my drafts aloud to my mother before sending them off to my editor. It was during these bonding moments that I started to realize my mother didn't fully grasp what I was writing about. Having grown up during the mid-50s, she was not familiar with these terms or their impact. She hadn't heard of phrases like unconscious biases, virtue signaling, or cultural appropriation. Blaccent and blackfishing had not yet been introduced into her vocabulary. When I explained these terms in detail, she was quick to understand their meanings, but hadn't grown up with the same language or open dialogue that growing up with the internet provided me. During my mother's youth, receiving information about civil rights movements often involved attending meetings, joining organizations, or walking in a march. But for millennials, who grew up during the rise of social media platforms, becoming aware, or as some would say, woke, is accessible every day, online, where communities of thousands of people can share their experiences, their research, and their wisdom in seconds. More importantly, in these conversations with my mother, I started to realize that a lot of the obstacles and challenges young Black women of my generation are dismantling and combating are not widely known, not even to our own parents. If my Black mother wasn't aware of the word misogynoir, or the ways in which colorism negatively impacts young dark-skinned girls and women of today, then how could she support me as I face the obstacles thrown at me daily? Or why would I expect men and women of other racial backgrounds to also have this knowledge? If there is not widespread education or media focus on the often silent, persisting issues young Black women face today, then how could a society ever begin to support young Black women? If some of the older Black women who raised me are still unknowingly enforcing respectability politics, if some of the Black men in my family continue to spread colorist ideology, if some of my white colleagues aren't aware of the ways they uphold racist stereotypes about Black women in the workplace, and as some of my non-Black peers aren't knowledgeable about the ways in which white supremacy influences them to look down upon Black women, then how do we begin to move closer to creating better conditions for Black women? In chatting with my mother, and later her friends, I realized that the niche issues negatively impacting the livelihood of young Black women in my generation are almost completely unknown, mostly because there is a collective belief, a false one, that we are living in a post-racial society. How can a society truly be post-racial when there was so much collective surprise over events like the murders of George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, and Breonna Taylor? When many people, including people in my own circle, reacted with shock as 2,000 rioters stormed the Capitol without the National Guard being called. When Kyle Rittenhouse's not guilty sentence was greeted by so many with confusion over how he could not only be decriminalized, but also painted simultaneously as a victim and a hero. For me, and so many of my Black friends, none of these events were surprising. When you're conscious and aware that racism hasn't necessarily lessened, but instead disguised itself systematically, these events are to be expected in post-racial America. Because of triumphs like the first Black president, the first Black vice president, and Black women winning Oscars, even my own mother, like many Americans, was somewhat convinced that we are living in a post-racial era. From a young Black poet reading at the 2021 presidential inauguration, to a rise in interracial partnerships, there is a clouded image of America as a rehabilitated nation of unity that welcomes and celebrates a diverse society. The greatest gymnast is a young Black woman, Simone Biles. The biggest pop star is a young Black woman, Beyoncé. The most exceptional tennis player in the world is a young Black woman, Serena Williams. The most popular young actress in Hollywood is a Black woman, Zendaya. And any hip-hop fan will likely tell you that their favorite female rapper is a young Black woman. With so many young Black women dominating culture, entertainment, sports, and politics, it becomes difficult for a society to grapple with the fact that young Black women are still most in need of support and advocacy. While a millennial Black woman may not be dealing with the same blatant racism that earlier generations endured, it would be fallacious to presume that conditions have improved. Instead, they've modernized to fit the inconspicuously racist era created by the digital age.